Welcome on behalf of IPES to this regional session of the IPES 8 Stakeholder Days. Thank you for joining us from Europe, Central Asia and Africa. If you joined us for the opening session last Thursday, you'll know that the aim of the Stakeholder Days is to engage and foster even greater dialogue between the IPES Secretariat, its self-organized networks, the open-ended network of IPES stakeholders, ONET for short, and the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IFPES for short, and the wider stakeholder community. My name is Claire Dool, and I'll be making sure the event goes smoothly, keeps to time, and of course, that there is maximum engagement. So with that in mind, let me ask all of you a question. I've just launched a poll. You should be able to see that on your screens. And the question is, in what main capacity do you engage with IPES? So in principally, is it as a policymaker, a scientist, a teacher, a practitioner, civil society, indigenous people, business, student, or other? It would be very nice to know what the other is. I can see that there is an other, and if that person in the chat could say where they're from, which sector, that would be fantastic. But I can see that we've got in #1 poll position scientists, followed by policymakers and civil society, a very important interface between science and policy makers. So I will end that poll now, and so you know that I haven't just been making it up. Here are the results. So in a normal conference, you would see who you were sitting next to, but virtually we have to do it like this. So you can see there's a lot of scientists, policymakers, civil society. Thank you very much for joining us. The person or persons who are other, you might want to put in the chat who or what sector you actually come from. So thank you very much for that first bit of engagement. Now, I'm ably assisted by my co-moderator, Wanja, and if you attended the opening ceremony, you'll remember Wanja. So Wanja, over to you, my co-moderator.
Thank you, Claire, and welcome everyone. My name is Wanja Nyingi, and I'm a member of IPES MEP. I work for the National Museums of Kenya. Before we proceed, I would like to make some housekeeping announcements. You'll be able to see that from a slide that will be put up right now. Yes, as you can see, you'll be able to find interpretation on the icon shown on the slide. And for questions and answers, we ask that you kindly put your questions in the Q&A box and that you would specify to whom your questions will be directed. You also notice the chat box, which is open now for other comments and interaction among yourselves and the panelists as well. And also would like to remind you that this session is being recorded and will be shared on the IPES website. And finally, the tags to use on social media are at IPES, and the hashtag is hashtag IPES8, hashtag IPES stakeholders, and hashtag for nature. And for now, we'll move on to opening remarks. Would like to introduce to you Ana Maria Hernandez Salga. She's the IPES chair and will be giving opening remarks to this meeting. Welcome, Ana.
Thank you very much, Wanja, and good morning to all of you. It is my pleasure to be today here at this opening of the Dialogue of Stakeholders from Europe, Central Asia, and Africa, preparatory to our 8th plenary session of IPES that it will be starting in the 14th of June, so very soon. Yesterday, during my opening remarks at the stakeholders meeting from Asia and the Pacific, I was recalling the conjunction of different and important scenarios of an environment that we're facing this year, and the next decade, including, well, you know, that we were celebrating the World Environment Day, but also we are starting the decade on ecosystem restoration, the UN Decade on Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, and today is the World Ocean Day, and the negotiations of a new global biodiversity framework under the Convention on Biological Diversity, which is going to celebrate the Conference of the Parties in China, sorry. And of course, we have also the 26th Conference of the Parties on Climate Change. So we have a lot of meetings moving around this year. So all the decision-making processes that are happening now needs to be based on the best, solid, and credible science and practices. And of course, the works of IPBES as community has to embrace this challenge and provide from an open and respectful dialogue of knowledge systems, all the data, the scenarios, and the plausible futures to support in the best way possible the path for better decisions to reverse the loss of biodiversity and to strengthen how nature contributes to people. Now, today you will have the opportunity to exchange information and ask questions and detect gaps that are so important to guide informed discussions around building knowledge on biodiversity towards, of course, our plenary session. This meeting is quite interesting indeed, as it calls the voices coming from not only from different stakeholders, but also from different regions, Africa, Europe, and Central Asia. Although all of you have different situations and experiences, I have seen during the last regional stakeholders meetings past week and this week that there is a common voice that unites the youth, the practitioners, the decision makers, the scientists, the indigenous peoples and local communities, the civil society, the organizations. All of us are really concerned and aware of the rapid decline of biodiversity and nature contributions to people. And all of us wants to collaborate through our knowledge and practices within IPBES to strengthen the science policy bridge. In doing so, today you will have the opportunity to hear the lessons and gaps from the regional assessment of Europe and Central Asia and the regional assessment of Africa. Both assessments were approved in the 2018 during our 6th plenary session in Medellin, Colombia, my country. Also, you will learn more about the experiences and establishment of national and regional platforms and networks on biodiversity and how to engage better with IPBES work. As chair, I am very happy to receive during the 8th plenary session your messages, the ones that you are going to prepare today, which I am sure will contribute to strengthen the results of all the discussions, but above all, will be totally important in consolidating ways and means for an integrative knowledge on biodiversity and nature contributions to people. So thank you very much, and I wish you a successful meeting.
Thank you very much, Ana Maria. And also thank you for your commitment, because Ana Maria has been in all of the regional meetings, and the one in Asia yesterday, I thought was early for me, which was 8 o'clock in Geneva. It was 2 o'clock in the morning in Colombia. So Ana Maria, thank you very much for your commitment. And indeed, as you just said, it's all about engagement and collaboration. You mentioned that we will find out more about the regional assessments. And so it's my pleasure to ask Emma Archer, one of the co-chairs of IPBES 2018 regional assessment for Africa, to speak to us about some key findings, the gaps in both knowledge and implementation from that assessment. So Emma, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everybody from Johannesburg. Good morning to some people joining. It's great to be here to be presenting to the best broader stakeholder community. So I'm going to be talking about the Africa assessment, which, as Ana Maria indicated, was approved in 2018 in Colombia. I'm going to talk first of all, next slide please, about the extent to which Africa's natural assets are unique. Next slide, please. So Africa has an extraordinarily rich biodiversity and ecosystem services, as well as a wealth of indigenous and local knowledge. For example, it's the last place on Earth with a significant assemblage of large mammals. And yet, despite this value, we find, and this is by no means just limited to Africa, the true nature of our contributions to human well-being is underappreciated in the decision-making processes. So the value of nature's contributions to human well-being is underaccounted for in decision-making and policy. Next slide, please. And of course, Africa's biodiversity is under pressure. So in a way, we've looked at what the status quo is, but what's changing. Next slide, please. So if we look, for example, at the proportions of species in each red list category, we see, for example, that for all regions, there's reason for concern already before we look at what's changing in the future. So in some regions, we have species that are extinct. For some, we have species that are extinct in the wild. And pretty much for all regions, we've got species that are critically endangered. What's also of concern there, and I'll finish up by talking about this more, is the areas where we have data deficiencies. So there's still a great deal that we don't know. Next slide, please. So obviously, as a continent, most countries are committed to particular targets that we need to achieve. And one of the big questions when we look at biodiversity and ecosystem services is whether we can achieve our targets. Next slide, please. So if we look in particular at African Union Agenda 2063, the SDGs and the Aichi biodiversity targets, if we look at a range of plausible futures for the African continent, we find that achieving these targets is unlikely in 3 of the 5 plausible futures for the African continent that we looked at. Of those 5 possible plausible futures, only the 2 that have environmental goals as more of a priority are identified as the most likely paths to meet Africa's economic, social, and environmental development aspirations. So 3 out of the 5 plausible futures for the African continent that we considered make achieving those critical goals unlikely. Next slide, please. But we have options, and we wanted to particularly take a practical approach and talk about some of the options that are facing us on the African continent, as well as perhaps a little bit of good news. Next slide, please. So we are already seeing that some measures taken to protect biodiversity by African continents, such as the expansion of protected areas, the control of invasive alien species, restoration of ecosystems, and we should remember that we've just said World Environment Day and the theme was ecosystem restoration. What we're seeing is that these measures that are being undertaken by a number of African governments are already showing some positive evidence. So in some areas, they've already contributed to the recovery of threatened species. But one of the difficulties here is, of course, that we can have good evidence on the ground and we can have good policies, but there are critical gaps when it comes to implementation. Next slide, please. So on the African continent, we're facing both gaps in knowledge and gaps in evidence, as well as gaps in implementation. And I'll just conclude by unpacking both of those. First of all, if we return to, for example, the proportion of species in red list categories that I referred to previously, obviously there's data deficiencies for all regions across the continent. So there's a great deal we still don't know. If we look at the infographic below, that shows the progress of countries on the African continent, those who are committed to targets, towards key targets. And one of the things I want to emphasize there as well is that we still have knowledge gaps. So it's very difficult to assess the progress of countries towards targets where we're still missing evidence. What's important also is that, of course, this affects implementation. If we want to implement policies that allow us to move towards critical targets, such as the Sustainable Development Goals and the Aichi biodiversity targets, it's going to be hard to measure and report on our progress, and thus to inform the implementation of policies if we don't have enough evidence. So knowledge gaps and gaps in implementation are not separate to each other. The one can really drive the other. And good knowledge and good evidence can help us implement really good policy. And I think I'll leave it there. Thank you, Claire.
Thank you for that really clear and compelling presentation. Emma, please do stay, because I want to encourage everybody to ask you questions about that. But before we do, let me introduce Marcus Fischer, who was a co-chair of the IPES 2018 Regional Assessment for Europe and Central Asia. So Marcus, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Claire. Good morning, good day, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to join and to introduce the ECHA assessment. So the assessment for Europe and Central Asia. We have always admired the Africa team, actually, for their wonderful subtitles like Africa has unique assets and Africa has options. We found that Europe and Central Asia also have options, and I will introduce you to some of those. Next slide, please. This assessment was elaborated by a team of 120 experts from 36 of the 54 countries in the region, a very diverse group. Next, please. The area covered, Europe and Central Asia, included all of Russia, which is so Eastern Europe actually extended all the way to the Pacific. That is due to the IPES definitions, so don't get confused. So when we talk about Europe and Central Asia, it's actually also part of Northern Asia. Next, please. We considered more than 4,000 publications and received about 8,000 comments from external reviewers and governments, which we considered. And very importantly, you can download the report and the summary for policymakers, the link which is indicated here on the IPES website. Next, please. What we find, and that is quite analogous to what we just heard for Africa, is that nature is very precious. So nature's contributions to people are very precious for Europe and Central Asia. They are essential for human well-being and quality of life. And in economic terms, they can be worth thousands, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars per hectare in a year. We can also state that the trends of these nature's contributions to people are very unequal. Some have increased. These were actually very few, and these were only the material contributions, especially food production. But that has happened at the expense of declines in regulating nature's contributions to people, such as regulating air and water quality or climate mitigation, and at the expense of non-material contributions, for example, contributions to recreation or spirituality. That was underpinned by very sobering declines in biodiversity. So 14 out of the 15 terrestrial habitat types that we assessed experienced a decline in biodiversity status since the 1950s. And just as an example, wetlands decreased by 50% since 1970 in Western, Central and Eastern Europe, and only 9% of the EU marine habitat types show a favorable conservation status. And we have long lists of red listed species, as has Africa. Here just some examples: 42% of the terrestrial animal and plant species, 71% of the freshwater fish, and 60% of the amphibians, and 26% of the marine fish have been declining. Next, please. Now, the underlying cause, most important underlying direct driver, is actually land use change, followed by climate change, and also pollution, overexploitation, and invasive species contributed. All that reflects our societal choices, government policy, economic growth, population growth, and technological development, as shown in the assessment. It also reflects a loss of indigenous and local knowledge and associated practices. We also found that Europe and Central Asia consume much more than it produces, leaving a large ecological footprint also on the rest of the world. There was an extensive scenarios assessment, and it's clear that business as usual will not lead to the achievement of any of the goals, IG targets or SDGs, but only a future based on the balanced use of nature's contributions, reflecting diverse societal values and actually involving transformation is more likely to be sustainable. And we identified policy options which include mainstreaming of biodiversity, integration across sectors and also across levels, and participation. Next, please. We identified ample knowledge gaps. There was large geographical variation in knowledge. Our gaps in understanding include understanding of nature's contributions to people. Many, especially regulating and non-material nature's contributions, are not well understood. And we have gaps in our geographic spread of this knowledge also. The contribution of indigenous and local knowledge is in its infancy. Status and trends of nature is better known for some regions and some taxa and ecosystems than for others. The drivers of biodiversity change are understood in the sense of understanding direct drivers, but they are underpinning by indirect drivers, and the interaction between direct drivers and between direct and indirect drivers are all far from completely understood. Our scenario and modeling assessment showed that we have to rely very often on scenarios developed for the IPCC or other climate-related contexts, whereas integrated scenario and modeling studies capturing all the elements of the IPBES conceptual framework are lacking. If we look into the future, the pathways of these transformative pathways, which would be promising, are not well understood. What has to happen at what time is not really clear. And it's also not clear how to best mainstream policy objectives across different sectors and scales. Next, please. As Emma also pointed out, for Africa, this goes hand in hand also with implementation gaps. We identified that the implementation is hampered by a lack of goal orientation. Very often, action is not taken proactively, but reactively. If action is taken, it's not sufficiently focused and not sufficiently goal-oriented and measurable. There is a gap in integrated approaches across sectors. Very often the environmental sector measures there contradict other sectors. And also integration between public and private decision makers is lacking. We are lacking well-designed mixes of policy instruments that are tailored to the context. We are lacking the participation of a wide range of actors and stakeholders. Very often it is a bit too top-down governance or too much of a single sector stakeholder governance. Adequate funding is a big issue, is lacking very often, and many subsidies are still very harmful, need to be phased out. Economic growth is not decoupled from the degradation of nature, which is an extremely important indirect driver of growth, and implementation to counteract this is also in its infancy. That involves measuring national welfare beyond current economic indicators, also taking environmental indicators, biodiversity indicators into account. Conservation efforts include well-managed protected areas. In Europe and Central Asia, the area of protected areas is too small, and they are not well managed, and they are underfunded in many cases. And multifunctional, sustainably managed landscapes are also not sufficiently widespread and not sufficiently governed. All these implementation gaps are embedded in a gap of societal transformation, which could be accelerated by education, changes in consumption, and taking on shared responsibility and stewardship. Next. And given these knowledge and implementation gaps that we identified, I want to invite you to go back to the original document, and I'm happy to join a discussion now to clarify any further questions. And I want to thank all the stakeholders for the work for putting this agenda forward. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Marcus, for that rather sobering account of biodiversity loss in Europe and Central Asia. And yes, do please put questions in the Q&A for Marcus and Emma, and some are already coming in. A question for you, Emma. This is from Leonie from the Stockholm Environment Institute. And Leonie is asking the following. About data deficiency. How and what data is of priority, and how will it make a difference? What was and is new about your requests for filling data gaps if they've not been filled for so long? So a couple of questions there for you, Emma.
Okay. Thanks, Leonie. Can everybody hear me? So I actually think, and I mean, I perhaps say this as someone who's teaching biodiversity and climate change now, that we are making good progress on data all the time. So for example, a couple of years ago, at the time that the Africa assessment was released in 2018, we had not such great data on particular species, for example. And if I look at it now, a couple of years later, the opportunity to readdress some of the data has improved. I want to add a cautionary note there, however. COVID-19 has not been kind to conservation funding and to research funding on the African continent. And Marcus has also mentioned this in the context of Europe and Central Asia. So I think the next couple of years are going to see us trying to recover conservation funding, trying to be strategic, and also perhaps getting a little better about being creative about how we use funding and resources to address the continuing data gaps. But I do think we've made some progress.
Thank you very, very much for that. And Emma, if you are able to switch your video on, that would be fantastic. But I understand there's always connectivity issues.
No, it's okay.
Lovely, great to see you. And there's another question for you, Emma, from Sarah Belander. How are the findings from the Africa Regional Assessment communicated to national policymakers? And can you already track the impact of the assessment?
Thanks, Sarah, for that great question. So I can speak specifically for Southern Africa, for the SADC region, because that's the area I know best. So, well, continent-wide, there have been a range of engagements. And in fact, there were already, before the assessment was formally approved, we had national policy dialogues and regional policy dialogues starting to talk about the preliminary findings and how to communicate them. Subsequent to that, there have been a range of engagements. And so, for example, in the SADC region, the IPBES Africa Regional Assessment findings are reflected in a range of policy documents, including some of the work around natural resource management and the SADC climate change strategy, which addresses all member states of the SADC region. We're not tracking the impact of the assessment at the moment. I know there has been some great work in this regard. For example, there was a recent PhD at Wits University, supervised by the late Bob Scholes, who's always very much on our mind when we talk about this work, that did look at how findings of the regional assessments were kind of permeating through policy. But we're expecting to see more and more of that as we move forward. And obviously, this is an exciting year in terms of international negotiations on biodiversity and climate change alone. And these findings form some of the bases for the negotiations.
Thank you, Emma. Rob Spall, Director of Communications, has been following very closely these regional meetings, and Rob is in fact multitasking with questions, and sometimes he manages to have the answers to the questions too. And Rob, you wanted to talk about the tracking impact, or there's something that you could add to what Emma just said.
Yeah, thank you very much, Claire, and hello, everybody. Very briefly, just to add to Emma's really good answer, there is a admittedly not comprehensive tool, but still a useful tool that the IPBES Secretariat has implemented, which we call the Impact Tracking Database, or TRAC for short. What we do with that is we try and gather examples of good and sort of at different scales impact of the work that IPBES has published on things like policy, on investment, on actions and decisions, and even on new research. That is a crowdsourced tool, and it is available on our website. You can also just Google IPBES impact tracking, and you'll get it as the first result. And we encourage all of our stakeholders from all regions to use that to tell the story of IPBES impact, but also to help us by adding examples of impact that you become aware of into that as well, because there's no way we can be everywhere at all times to view where these impacts are and what kinds of impacts are happening. So we depend very much on our stakeholder community to help us populate the TRAC database as well.
Emma, there's another question for you from Momat, which is, given the lack of means in Africa, what solutions might there be for illegal logging and its impact on biodiversity? And if you could unmute yourself.
Sorry, that's kind of the theme music of 2020, 2021. Momat, that's a really interesting question. So I think there's a range of solutions, and of course they tend to be highly context specific. So how we address illegal logging in a country with strong environmental policy and well implemented environmental policy would obviously be quite different to a country, for example, in a post-conflict situation where we don't necessarily have very robust environmental policy on the ground. Some of the really interesting areas that we're seeing in dealing with illegal logging and deforestation are, for example, using market incentives and tax incentives for good public-private sector partnerships, so that addressing illegal logging is no longer simply the responsibility of the public sector, but that we can actually work together with private companies who obviously in some cases have a bit of skin in the game when it comes to conservation. That hasn't been an area where we've had a lot of activity in certain countries on the African continent, but it is a growing area of activity, and I think a very interesting one.
Thank you. Marcus, a question that's coming in for you. Where are the geographical knowledge gaps related to nature's contribution to people? Which regions, which countries are less researched?
I think in general, as mentioned, for the material nature's contributions to people, we have quite good knowledge, like food production, timber production over the whole region. But beyond that, there is a west-east gradient. The information is available at highest density and quality in Western Europe, and then it is of a less dense quality or quantity and quality as we go to Eastern Europe and Central Asia. But there is really a knowledge gap on non-material nature contributions to people and on some of the regulating ones everywhere.
Thank you, Marcus. There's a question here for you. When you say about gaps in our understanding of the status and trends of nature, about these zones, suburban fringe of big cities, where is this trend dramatically negative?
Thank you. In we also assessed urban habitats as one particular unit of assessment, and it's true. Yeah, we also observed a strong decline in biodiversity there, and that is due to this new urbanization, if you want, despite the positive biodiversity aspect some urban environments also have, if you think of gardens and parks and so forth. And I think this pressure is, of course, the direct pressure from the urban fringes. I agree with those. Is of course indirectly driven by the economy and by our unsustainable land use. And the indirect drivers behind that have been dealt with in the assessment too.
Thank you. Emma, a question here from Andrew Howard from Population Matters. The IPES Global Assessment published in May 2019 identified direct and indirect drivers of biodiversity loss and itemized population growth as one of the latter. To what extent is action on population growth issues actually being undertaken to prevent biodiversity loss? Emma, my dear, I'm going to ask you to unmute yourself.
You wouldn't think I talk for a living. There we go. Andrew, in the Africa assessment, yes, demographic change is identified as a direct driver of biodiversity loss. On the African continent, one of the things that we unpack quite carefully is that we look less at the overall amount of population and more at urban populations. So the significant concern there is urban populations and the trend to growing urban populations. And of course, urban growth projections for much of the African continent are very high. So there is a lot of very interesting work that's being done on understanding urban growth modeling, but also understanding the types of urban growth, because the growth in urban populations is not necessarily equal in terms of its impact on biodiversity. So one of our big areas of concern is unplanned urban growth. And some of the really good work around that is looking at what does unplanned urban growth look like? Why does it disproportionately impact on biodiversity, for example, with a disproportionate draw on services and ecosystem services? And most of all, how on the African continent can we engage in more sustainable urban growth that has less of an impact on biodiversity?
Marcus, a question from Shanmuga here. In the identified implementation gaps, protecting indigenous knowledge seems to be missing. Why is that?
Thank you. It's clearly loss of indigenous and local knowledge and practices is clearly a main driver of biodiversity loss in the region, and protecting and promoting this knowledge and practices is a big implementation gap. I just didn't want to reiterate it because I had mentioned it on the driver slide. So I fully agree, it is a big issue.
Emma, a question from Carla here. Do you identify generational behavioral change from young people in their views on biodiversity preservation?
So I think that we are seeing that. I can't say as a blanket statement that we are definitely seeing a generational behavioral change in terms of understanding conservation and biodiversity issues, but certainly the younger generations in many, many countries on the African continent are learning more about, for example, biodiversity and conservation than previous generations. If we look at school curricula, for example, in a number of different countries, notions of biodiversity and ecosystems and their fragility are increasingly being integrated into school curricula. So I think that this is probably an ongoing trend and something that we're going to see increasingly in the future. If I can speak from a very specific standpoint, as a teacher at a South African university, we are seeing more and more young people wanting to go into the biodiversity and ecosystem field and work in conservation. So I think that's very exciting. We're seeing a more diverse field of students wanting to engage and wanting to work on things like addressing some of the implementation and information gaps that we've addressed in our talks here today.
Thank you. Marcus, another question from Carla. Does the assessment measure where the private sector falls in their responsibility? I wonder whether that's fails, but I read it as falls in their responsibility for biodiversity loss and how to deal with it? Or is this a knowledge gap? What can be done to address private sector lobbying against preservation and restoration?
Thank you. I mean, we clearly state that probably the most important indirect driver of all these losses and declines is actually the externalization of these biodiversity effects and nature's contributions to people effects from our economic system. And so the regulations in terms of taxes, in terms of accounting, in terms of tariffs, in terms of subsidies, are all creating a framework for the private sector, which drives the private sector to produce unsustainably. And that is the background against which the question is asked. So it's not so surprising that the private sector is not so helpful. And then, of course, still the private sector has many options to do better than expected from that background, or to do worse. And sustainable consumption is, of course, also a question. What is actually really the demand? If we look at food, what is actually the demand here? Cheap food, a lot of red meat and so forth. If that is the demand, then the private sector will produce it. And they can still do it more sustainably or less sustainably. So our take on that is that there should be a concerted action, change regulation, change the consumer demand, and also produce more responsibly and sustainably.
Thank you very, very much, Marcus, and thank you, Emma, for answering those questions. There are more questions in the Q&A that we haven't been able to take. So if you are able to answer them, please do, because it's great that we've got so many questions coming in. And in fact, for this regional meeting, so many of you are attending. So thank you, Marcus, and thank you, Emma. So let's now look at one of the areas where IPES is really hoping to engage more, and it wants to attract more early career researchers. And members of the YES network, that's the Young Ecosystem Services Specialists, they have created an initiative, and they've done some research on the motivations, barriers and opportunities for early career researchers to get involved. And we're going to hear from some of them. But first of all, I'd like to give the floor to Carla Washbourne, who on behalf of the YES network is going to share some of the top line findings from their research on the motivations, barriers and opportunities for early career researchers to get involved in IPES work. So, Carla, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And thank you for the opportunity to present in this session. I am Carla Washbourne. I am from University College London and representing YES at this moment. I know we do have some slides which will appear momentarily. Here we go. So welcome. So YES is a global network of more than 600 early career researchers and practitioners in the field of ecosystem services. At the IPES 6 Medellin and IPES 7 Paris plenaries, we were accredited as an observer organization and sent delegations. During and after IPES 7, some YES members developed and conducted a survey on early career engagement, the science policy interface on biodiversity and ecosystem services. We were all curious about the participation of early career researchers in interfaces like IPES, but we noticed that most of the coverage in the literature that we could see on this topic was anecdotal or conceptual, and decided through a group discussion to collect some evidence on the topic beyond the experience of our delegation group. And we had 145 survey participants and present some of the preliminary results of this research here. Next slide, please. We asked early career researchers about their motivation to engage in science policy interface work, and the responses are summarized here. Encouragingly, the desire to participate in work is high and participate in work in the future. Participants described being interested in knowledge generation, knowledge assimilation and synthesis, and knowledge dissemination, many being key functions within IPES. Motivations to engage were clearly linked to specific outcomes, including to contribute to achieving societal change and to build expertise. And opportunities to network with policymakers and other stakeholders were seen as a really particularly important motivator. Participants describe a desire to be actively acknowledged for their participation in tangible ways, including formal co-authorship, fellowship opportunities, and acknowledgements as young scientists working in the field by more senior authors and experts. Next slide, please. We asked about barriers to engaging in this work, and again, the responses are summarized here. Many respondents don't feel confident in finding sources of funding to participate in science policy interface work. A number of participants see no or few limited opportunities to engage in work of this kind. And many said that they see no or few training opportunities to improve their skills and experience to be able to engage. Many felt that policymakers perceive early career researchers as not credible. And about a third of respondents said that senior colleagues are not so encouraging in participation of themselves in science policy interface work. Next slide, please. And finally, we asked about opportunities for engaging and the ways in which participation could be further supported. And again, these are summarized here. Encouraging those organizations active in science policy interface work to fund the creation of opportunities of different kinds, big and small, in different parts of the process, and to seek funding from a range of different sources, including governments, universities, with specific funds targeted to widening early career participation were seen as being particularly important. Making opportunities like IPBES fellowships more visible by strongly targeting communications to the places that early career researchers get a lot of their information, such as networks including YES, the Global Youth Biodiversity Network, the Biodiversity Science Policy Interfaces Network for Early Career Scientists, Future Earth ECR Network of Networks, and the Global Young Academy was seen as a big opportunity. Early career researchers could be supported to create their own trainings and opportunities and to develop knowledge in spaces such as IPBES through attaining observer status. IPBES could explore hosting online workshops for global early career researchers to complement things like the Fellows Program and the more general training resources that IPBES already hosts online. And establishing formal and informal mentorship, including peer-to-peer mentorship and training, could be a key enabler here. Credibility could be improved by shaping a variety of roles in the science policy interface work for different skill sets, different levels of experience, and proactively acknowledging early career involvement and development. And finally, recognition of science policy interface work could be further encouraged, helping this to be seen as part of research impact and help to develop a supportive community of practice around the topic. So I will close there and look forward to the rest of the discussion.
Thank you very, very much, Carla, for that really clear presentation. And I'm delighted to ask for two people who are very involved in the IPBES network to give their experience of the motivations, the opportunities, the barriers. So welcome to Håkon B. Stockland, who leads the newly created Social Sciences and Humanities group in ONET, and also to Leonie Maurice Manetti, who is on the IPBES Fellowship program that you briefly mentioned there, Carla. So Håkon, you've created this new group, this Social Sciences and Humanities group. What was your motivation for creating this new group, and how big is it, and where are the members from? Tell us a bit more about it.
Yes, thank you, Claire. So very nice to be here today. So yeah, I'll start with a very short introduction of this network, which, as you say, was quite recently established this year, actually. And it's called the Social Sciences and Humanities Network related to IPBES. And our main aim is to enhance the contributions from these disciplines in IPBES. And some of the background is that we're really excited about the pioneering work done by IPBES in this regard, both in terms of interdisciplinarity and also inclusion of social sciences and humanities. And we would really like to contribute to develop this work further. Because these disciplines are really needed for the work and outputs of IPBES, and for delivering policy relevant knowledge. And I think we also heard from the knowledge gaps presented in the regional assessment earlier today. For example, indirect drivers, implementation, social transformations, that these disciplines are really needed to fill some of the gaps that have been identified earlier. And so a big part of this work we're doing is to engage more social scientists and humanities scholars into IPBES. And this can be done in different ways. So one important way is, of course, to engage more experts in the assessments. But there are also a lot of other ways for people to engage. And as I said, we started up earlier this year, and we're already around 60, 70 members, which we think at least is pretty good for such a short time. However, these are mainly from what you might call the WEAG region, so Western Europe, North America, and Australia. And if anyone here today has any ideas on how we can reach out to other regions, that would be really great to hear about, especially today, I guess, Central Asia and Africa. And so in engaging more scholars from the social sciences and humanities, the group of early career researchers from these disciplines is a very important group for us to reach out to. And in terms of this work, we see that some of these points mentioned earlier by Claire is also very relevant for early career researchers from the social sciences and humanities. However, we also see that there are some additional challenges related to this group that we're trying to work on. And yeah, it's kind of a complex issue, but it has traditionally, even established scholars from the social sciences and humanities have been less engaged in science policy interfaces related to biodiversity, as well as global environmental assessments. So IPBES is now trying to change this a bit, but the traditions and the history is still pretty strong there. And it's also related to broader factors such as academic cultures, the understandings within the social sciences and humanities of assessments like this, the history, and also for many people just to see the relevance and the possibilities to actually make an impact. So it's also related to what you might call more infrastructural factors, such as funding, communication, reaching out, and also the broader education system. So there's a lot of to work with on that.
Yes, indeed. You've got, as you say, the more institutional challenges, as well as some of those that Carla mentioned in her survey. Leonie, to bring you into the conversation, what did you think about the challenges that Carla outlined? Did they resonate with you?
The challenges definitely resonated. I mean, as you can imagine, it differs depending on your region, depending on your discipline, like Håkon just mentioned, but they definitely resonate.
But it seemed quite shocking that senior colleagues were not supporting early career researchers in engaging more with this science policy in interface. What do you think the reason is for that, Leonie?
Well, they do. When you agree to do the fellowship, at least in my case with the values assessment, you commit a certain percentage of your time to work on the assessment. And some of our senior colleagues feel that they've invested in giving us these positions as postdoctoral researchers, as an example, and they don't necessarily want us to spend more time on something else. They know that there's already high levels of burnout in this stage of our career, so they just feel that us contributing or serving on these assessments is just making it harder for ourselves.
I mean, you seem to be between a rock and a hard place. Either you've got your colleagues who are not supporting you, and then in Carla's research there was the evidence that policymakers don't always perceive early career researchers as particularly knowledgeable. Have you had that sort of barrier, Leonie?
I haven't had as much experience directly with policymakers, and I think that also differs by region. In my situation in Namibia, for example, I think it depends on the organization that you're with. So if you are with something credible, such as IPES, career stage doesn't matter as much. But I think in the bigger picture, if it does come from somebody more established in their career, they are likely to listen more. But I do have to mention, I haven't had as much experience directly with policymakers.
And Leonie, you're on the IPES fellowship program. That was cited by Carla as one of the solutions, but do you think that it needs to be more visible or accessible? What do you think could be done better?
It has certainly become more visible. At least before I joined, it was very much word of mouth. I think with the publication or the release of the global assessment results, IPES definitely gained wide, a lot of people saw it and it became way more exposed. I think more people know of it now. Many more people in different fields know of IPES. So I think that's definitely, increasing. It has definitely helped me with getting more people on board, more people to, think of the future assessments and being involved there. And I agree with Carla, organizations like IPES and bringing us together, having the opportunity to they network with other networks such as YES has definitely helped. And I think IPES just gaining more prominence will definitely contribute to that.
Hakon, what was your assessment of the Carla's ideas, or in fact the team from YES Network's ideas for the opportunities for greater engagement? What did you think of the suggestions, and do you have any other suggestions to offer Carla and her team?
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I think they're really great examples for opportunities. And quite concrete. So for funding, for example, for communication. But I think, and especially for early career researchers from the social sciences and humanities, we also need some even more knowledge, I think, on the barriers and perhaps what you could call the indirect barriers related to culture, etc. So perhaps it's not enough to reach out and make people aware that, for example, the fellowship exists, but they also have to be convinced that it's actually something that's interesting for them. So there's some additional things there that, and in our network, we're looking into producing some more knowledge on that. So yeah.
So Hakon, you're in ONET yourself. What was your motivation to get involved?
Within ONET, yes. So the whole SSH network is a network a network member of ONET. That's the correct phrasing, I think. Yeah, and this has been really helpful for our network to use the platform and the facilitations that we get from ONET. Yeah, so that's been a solution that we're very happy about.
Leonie, what was your motivation for applying to be an IPES fellow? Was it some of the things that Carla mentioned, or was there other reasons that you wanted to get involved?
It's definitely a mixture of what Carla had put up. In my case, it was, my long-term career goals and the fact that I want to work at the science policy interface, and there's no defined career for that yet. There's no clear trajectory, and something like IPES and a fellowship with IPES seemed like and is a great opportunity to get into that interspace.
And I would like to say you can go onto the IPES website and find more details about the fellowship. But let me go back to Carla just to reflect on some of the things that you've heard from Hakon and from Leonie.
Yes, absolutely. No, it's really wonderful to have these insights, actually, and I think it's great to have them sort of reinforced in a way, and to have sort of additional voices feeding into what we have back already from these 145 participants to the survey. What is fascinating, what's something that actually we didn't break down in this survey, is the areas within which people were working. So with the social sciences and humanities, actually, we don't have a really good sense of where the respondents were coming from. So I think that is something which I'm kind of very keen to understand a bit more about. I think it opens a really interesting reflection about who sees themselves as part of this community. And I know that this is certainly a conversation that I myself have gotten into before in setting up an early career network just locally in the UK around environment. And it's actually taken a few years. We now have a very diverse program, including many people from arts and humanities. But I think, yeah, it's building that conversation to understand what this community is and can be. So that's certainly a limitation. I realize that we just haven't asked that question well enough in this. But I guess a couple of things that it would be good to add just on these reflections is that people who did engage, so we asked people whether they had actively engaged in science policy interface work or not. Those who had engaged, even to some extent, generally had a more positive view and saw fewer barriers. So it was people who'd kind of gotten into that space and had made that first step did then seem to see the path slightly clearer in front of them, which was interesting. And I'm not going to draw any like statistical inferences from that, but it was just very interesting to see in the data that we had back from it. And also to flag that there was quite a tension or sort of a polarization, I suppose, in some of the responses. So particularly the one about senior colleagues, there were a similar amount who said that they were encouraging. So we had this quite sort of polarized spread of responses across some of the areas like that, and sort of, yeah. So it's not a totally negative story, but it was quite polarized, and I think is probably for some of the reasons that have come out in our discussion so far.
Well, thank you, Carla. Please, everybody stay with us because there's some questions coming in from the audience. Carla, I think actually a very good question, because there are people who are joining us from Francophone West Africa. And how much engagement does the Yes Network have from Africa, especially from Francophone Africa? And how might this be improved?
Yeah, good question. I wish I had the statistics to hand, because I know that we have a sort of running map of countries from which there are formal members engaged in Yes. So I'm not sure exactly in terms of numbers, but I know it is not very high. I know the membership for Yes is particularly concentrated in certain countries, and particularly North America, Europe, etc. What was interesting for this survey is actually the dominant respondents were from Europe, particularly from Germany and from India, but certainly African continent-wise, there's not a strong representation, and we would absolutely love there to be. But yeah, the question around Francophone Africa in particular, yeah, this is challenging. So a lot of our official sort of, how would you say, kind of network work is done in English language, but we recognize that is an absolute limitation to lots of people. So I think it's something that we are mindful of and really do need to be more mindful of going forwards in terms of our communications and how we try to open this network up to others.
Yes, and there was another question there about was this survey offered in any other language than English, and whether you plan to use other languages to encourage wider engagement. I don't expect you can give a yes/no answer, but I assume that it's something that you should consider.
Absolutely. No, I can confirm that this round of it, so this is the very first kind of attempt for us to gather some of this data, and this was done in English. But I think it's a wonderful suggestion. And actually across the group that did this research, which is numerous, we all have different first languages and working languages between us. So no, absolutely.
I'd like to bring in Ingun Storrow, who's head of IPES TSU on capacity building, because there's a question here, Ingun, that perhaps you're able to answer. Are there any fellowship options for social sciences and humanities early career researchers to participate in IPES work and assessments and workshops?
Absolutely, Claire, and thank you for that question. We have the IPES Fellowship Program that we have heard from Leonie and here today that does indeed open for people with all backgrounds. So it includes, also social sciences and humanities, but also natural sciences, represent those that represent or have expertise in indigenous and local knowledge systems, or policy experts and practitioners. So we do welcome people with that background, and we have now 92 fellows currently in the assessments of IPES, and it's a very popular program. So there's no and the fellows participate from A to Z. So they start and they contribute and learn about that assessment process. And it takes 3 to 4 years. Hopefully the plenary will approve the 2 new assessments, one on transformative change and one on the nexus at IPES 8. And if that's the case, we will open up for new fellowships in those 2 assessments.
Thank you, Ingun. A question, Hakon, for you. With the new social sciences group, how does this work with experts who prefer to identify as interdisciplinary rather than social sciences? Is there any blurring of the lines when tracking which disciplines are engaging with IPES? Hakon.
Yeah, thanks. It's a very good question, and it's always really hard to draw the line, so to speak, between social sciences and humanities, interdisciplinarity. Well, what I can say is it's open to anyone that's interested. So there's no limitations like that. But one of our main aims is to enhance the diversity of knowledge and perspectives from the social sciences and humanities. So you could say we're, in this respect, we're mainly focusing on engaging knowledge and perspectives that hasn't been so prevalent in IPES already. So that's kind of a part of this initiative.
Mm-hmm. Hakon, another question. How does IPES engagement with social sciences compare with that of the IPCC? And is there any effort by your group to also work with IPCC?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. Thanks. So I'm part of IPES, and I haven't really worked with IPCC, so I don't know it that well, but I have a quite clear impression that IPES is further developed when it comes to inclusion of social sciences and humanities than IPCC is.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Interesting. Carla, you mentioned the Global Youth Biodiversity Network. What are the links between them and the YES network? And will they work together for the UN Biodiversity Summit, which we hope is going to happen later this year?
Good question, and I wish I had a specific response to that. We do have at least informal links with all of the networks that I named. I think this is why we recognize that actually as a communication channel, we're very porous. I don't have any specific plans, but if that is a stealth suggestion, thank you very much. It would be noted down. There are a number of YES colleagues around and about this session today as well. So yes, anything that's coming out in terms of encouragements or suggestions or thoughts for what we could do next, we're very, very happily noting down.
Leonie, what are your recommendations to early career researchers to engage with the science policy interface? You're one of the fortunate 90 people who are on this fellowship program, which I understand is highly sought after. So from your experience, what sort of recommendations would you give to early career researchers to engage with this science policy interface?
Well, it would definitely be networking, being involved, even if you're not directly involved with a fellowship, following knowledge transfer, I am not involved with YES, but I have many of my fellow fellows are a part of YES, and there's knowledge transfer that happens there. So I would encourage anyone that isn't a fellow yet and would want to become a fellow to continue, keep that communication open. If there is a sort of community of practice around it, whether that is at your university or in your country, find a way to become involved there. It does ultimately lead to these types of opportunities if you are aware of them.
So Carla, you've got lots of food for thought, lots of ideas from Hakon and from Leonie, as well as from the audience. Do you know what the next steps are? This was preliminary research. Do you have the agreement from your colleagues to work on this? Do you plan to revise it, do it in different languages? What are the next steps?
Again, yes, so I should absolutely reiterate this is a collective effort. So a number of us have been involved in collecting this work, and I shan't speak for all of them on next steps. I know that the things that we are very keen to do with it is to very formally put this piece of work out. So the intention is to have it published. So if anybody is interested in actually seeing this data, hopefully it will be out in a published format at some point in the foreseeable future. But yeah, I mean, our hope is that it really is the beginning of a conversation. It's something that we just spotted as a gap, and we're just trying to pull, some more observations based on evidence into this space, into this wonderful space that we've opened up today. So yeah, I think actually all of the suggestions and ideas that have come from this session are really helpful, and we'll be able to feed those back in. But yeah, I mean, the intention was never that this was the last step. The intention is that this is the beginning of a conversation.
Thank you. Hakon, a question that's just come in, interest, of course, in your SSH network and how to become a member. So where can people find more information? I'm sure you can put it in the chat, but just tell us. You've got more than 100 members, but how do more people get involved with your network?
Yeah, you can do that via the web page that we have. I can post the address in the chat afterwards here.
Mm-hmm. And let me thank everybody for their contributions, for the very informed questions. Just before we finish this session, I'd like to bring in Rob Spool, the Director of Communications again, who has a few words to say about data and surveys.
Thanks very much, Claire. I really just wanted to build on Carla's last comment about next steps, and that is to mention and to remind everybody that the results of the 2020 IPBES Stakeholder Survey, which had more than 1,000 respondents and went into a great deal of detail about who's engaging with IPBES, what the motivations are for their engagement with IPBES, will be published as soon as the plenary session that's about to start has concluded. So at the end of IPBES 8, the full set of data will be available on Zenodo for any kind of research. And perhaps that's something YES might perhaps also be interested in doing, is to do some cross-tabulation and to do some comparisons between the sampling from the broader survey of the stakeholder community and from what came through from the YES network as well. So just to point that out. Thank you.
So thank you, Hakon. Thank you, Leilani and Carla, for updating us on the knowledge, but also the gaps and your vision for how early career researchers can become more engaged in the science policy interface. We're going to take a short break now for 10 minutes. When we come back, we're going to look at the regional and national platforms network to hear what they've been doing in Africa, Europe, and Central Asia. But we're going to go on a short 10-minute break. So this is an opportunity to make yourself a cup of tea or coffee and get away from the screen, but do listen to the music, because we've got some music from Chile and the Sami communities from Northern Europe. So do stay with us and come back in 10 minutes. Thank you very much. Welcome back after that amazing musical interlude. Efforts to strengthen national and regional capacities are a key component of IPES work on building capacity under the rolling work programme up to 2030. As part of these efforts, but IPES is working to encourage the development of national and regional science policy platforms and networks. These platforms and networks contribute greatly to the work of IPES by creating a place for dialogue and bringing together key national actors in joint initiatives and collaboration to achieve the shared biodiversity vision to 2050. I'm first of all going to ask Cecilia Lindblad, Chairwoman of the Scientific Council for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services and the IPES National Focal Point in Sweden, to take the floor. Cecilia, we're all ears. Please start.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the possibility to share some experience from our Swedish IPES related networks. And I have some slides, so yes, could I have the first? Thank you very much. So we have this regional possibility, the capacity building here in Sweden, and I'm working at Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. It's a public agency that carries out assignments on behalf of the Swedish government. We have quite a small government here. Swedish EPA does a lot of expert work. And I'm also the national focal point for IPES, as you mentioned. So please, the next slide. So what we do here in Sweden to facilitate and taking all important information coming from IPES and IPES assessments, we have the Swedish Scientific Council for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, I will talk about a little bit, and also we do some reports, often in Swedish, and conferences. So this is a picture of Sweden, how it looks like now in the springtime. So you know, it's quite nice now. So next slide, please. So it's important to build bridges between science, policy, and society, as IPES is founded for, and as we think as well. And this Council for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, we established 2013 just to support the work with IPES and IPES related questions. And we also have some work doing with the Convention for Biodiversity and the substance just going on for the moment, actually. So we aim to look at both of these two important organizations or platforms. The council consists of about 35 representatives from different Swedish universities, scientific institutions, and they have different disciplines. It's so important that we meet together from different disciplines: social scientists, humanities, natural scientists, and also people from different agencies in Sweden. We have this agency for marine and water management, the agriculture, the forest agency, for example. And there are a few platforms in Sweden where we have that kind of broad group of people coming from different perspectives. So that's one important thing that this group, and they also like to meet. That's really funny for us. And we have about 2 to 3 meetings yearly, and between that it's a lot of email correspondence, of course, and we get help with reviewing assessments, prepare for IPES plenary, as we are engaging for the moment. And we also organize national conferences with the support and help from the group of representatives in this council. Yes, next slide, please. So then we also produce some reports, and I will also have the possibility now to thank to the IPBES Secretariat supporting us with figures and all kind of technical things that we need for our report. The first report we did was the IPBES-like assessment of Nordic coastal ecosystems. It took about 2 years and it was kind of heavy work. It was a cooperation between the Nordic countries, and we get some financial support from Nordic Council of Ministers together with the national funding. And they are produced in English, and you can find them in the web page of the Nordic Council of Ministers. We also did a summary for policymakers, and we released that 2018 at the IPBES 6, I think it was. So that's another, that was kind of very interesting work and important and timely work, I would say. So next, please. Then we continue to do other types of reports. And one of the latest is about climate change and biodiversity, because we see that climate change is discussed without really connecting to biodiversity and vice versa. So we thought it was important to make a conclusion from actual IPBES report as well as the latest report from IPCC and put that in a Swedish perspective. So that is a report in Swedish, unfortunately, a short summary in English. And then we have also a short report describing the most important conclusions in the global assessment and also put in a Swedish context. And we do this for spreading the information to more than scientists, to the broader audience, to the broader society, to try to learn and to show the importance of IPBES work, and also to try to inform a broader society about this important work. Next slide, please. We continue with the report, and we also have summarized the key message of IPBES report on land degradation and restoration recently. And I think that report was really interesting, and we try to show that in this report and also give examples in Swedish to help municipalities, organizations in Sweden to learn and to act when they work in this direction. The most important work in the beginning of IPBES, I think it was this pollination and food production report. And we have seen a lot of effort since then in Sweden related to the IPBES report. So we also did a summarizing in Swedish the results from IPBES report on pollination. Next, please. What we also do, we have yearly conferences. I think it's important to reach out to a broader audience, to the society in general. And we invite for free yearly a conference, one-day conference. And it's quite started for some years ago, 2017. And since then, last year were over 400 people attending the virtual conference we have with the title Biodiversity, Climate and Transformative Change. It was a great interest. This autumn, we will have a conference with the team of biodiversity and human welfare. And we also are in the finalization of a book about biodiversity in Sweden, a lot of referencing to IPBES works. more that are connected to IPBES and Swedish Environmental Protection Agency is that we support IPBES work financially through contribution to IPBES Trust Fund, and we also have we also try to finance participation of Swedish experts when they take part in assessment works. And we have Marie Stenseke in MEP. We support her financially as well. I think that was my last slide. I have one more. And you can find some information in English at our webpage at Swedish Environmental Protection Agency. You see the link here. And you are also welcome to contact me if you have further questions or interest in what we are doing. So thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Cecilia, and please do stay with us to take some audience questions. Thank you very much for updating us on the interdisciplinary nature of your work and how you're customizing IPBES reports for a Swedish or even a Nordic audience. So now let's hear from Da Silvestre Sie, a scientist at the West African Science Center on Climate Change and Adapted Land Use in Burkina Faso. Silvestre is also a member of WABES that aims to facilitate capacity building across West Africa in support of IPBES. Silvestre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Claire. Good afternoon, everybody. So it's a great pleasure for me to join this meeting, and thank you for giving us the opportunity to present the activities of our WABES. I think I have some slide, please. Can you? Okay. Yeah, next, please. Okay, so the West African Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services project is implemented in West African region, which includes the 15 ECOWAS member countries. So it is a 5-year project funded by the German Ministry in charge of environment through its International Climate Initiative. So next, please. Yeah, the WABES project aims at supporting the implementation of IPBES work program in the West African region. So the implementation is done through capacity building of stakeholder for science policy interfaces related, of course, related to IPBES. We also aim to promote the uptake of IPBES products in the region, particularly the assessment. WABES aim also to facilitate and encourage stakeholders' engagement in IPBES processes. This is particularly the different assessment. And finally, we aim to improve communication between West Africa and IPBES. Next, please. Next slide, please. Okay, so what is our approach to implement? It will be through two main components. First, capacity building, and this is done through the establishment of a master program on managing science policy interface related to IPBES. It is actually an interdisciplinary master program with international lecturers. Students are from the 15 West African countries, ECOWAS member countries, and up to now, 15 students already successfully defended their thesis, and 15 of them are currently enrolled in the program. They are even defending their proposal today at the same time. So another approach is through the regional expert platform. So we have two components of this. We have a virtual online platform, which contains currently 168 members. So you can get a register on this platform on the internet. So we also organize a series of workshops. It can be physical or virtual workshop. So until now, we have organized 8 different workshops and attended to our workshop, we have more than 300 participants up to now. And these participants are from 21 countries, West African countries, and also from Europe and over part of the world. Next slide, please. Please. Okay, so having presented briefly, so maybe just to give over information, participants from these different workshops are different stakeholders, scientists, decision makers, and practitioners. And one of the picture they show previously, you can see also one of the Nobel Prize 2018. Here is based in Burkina Faso. So it shows a bit how we involve every participant to our activities. So having said this, what lesson can we really learn from the activities, the implementation of WABES project? The first one is we face some challenges, of course. As said, we organize different workshops, or physical one. It's one per year. So between these workshops, there is a gap. So this is a challenge. We try to fill this gap by organizing a series of interactive mini workshops online, particularly in the context of COVID. So this helps us a lot to keep in touch with different stakeholders. So what I've been achieving, we have been able to build a strong network, as I was saying, composed of scientists, decision makers, practitioners, etc. Another challenge that we face is the concrete uptake of the IPES product. So what is our strategy? Is just to now support or assist the national focal point to build their national network in their countries. So we can give a concrete example of Côte d'Ivoire, where we assist the focal point of Côte d'Ivoire to organize his network at the national level. Of course, this can still be improved by including the decision makers. So other challenges is the participation of IPES activities in the region. So it can be explained by a different thing. There is a language barrier. There are also maybe the lack of information on IPES. So WABES try to facilitate this. For example, by preparing the application, helping those who are interested to prepare their application to IPES call for nomination and so on. And as I was saying also, our activities are bilingual because the West African region, we have several Francophone countries. So it came up that many are complaining, saying the activities are in English only. So WABES tried to solve this by making its activities bilingual. So every time you have English and French. Okay, other challenges that for now, not all West African countries are members of IPES. So WABES try to encourage this country to become member of IPES. We can give a concrete example with Sierra Leone, who recently became an official member of IPES by nominating a national focal point who is deeply involved in the activities of WABES. And finally, another challenge is related to capacity building for science policy interface. So this is also solved through our master program. And of course, we make some short training with other stakeholders who are not really students. We introduce them to IPES and explain them how they can really support the activities of IPES, how they can really get involved in IPES activities. So this is briefly a summary of what I wanted to present to you. So I'll be very happy to receive your question for more explanation. Thank you very much. For those who are interested, we can go on the website, WABES website, to get more information. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sylvestre, for updating us on your capacity building and your workshops, but also for the challenges. And you said there could still be more work done on policy inclusion. And one of the questions from the audience is, how much success would you say that you've had in spreading the messages of the IPES assessments to policymakers in West Africa?
Okay, thank you very much for this this question. Actually, when I was talking about decision makers, it's mainly the national focal point. You know, here in this country, from one country to another, the focal point is located in a given institution. It can be the ministry in charge of environment, the ministry in charge of agriculture, and I think in one country it's even located in the prime minister. So through the focal point, we rarely reach the decision makers. And in one of my slides, and during our workshop, I think we, here in Burkina Faso in 2019, we even invited the minister in charge of environment who was personally present to the meeting, and he gave really the support to WABES. And this is the same process we use in different countries. And we hope that our message will be taken into account. Yeah. So this is the answer I can give.
Thank you, Sylvestre. Just to say to people, do put questions in the Q&A and not in the chat. But I see in the chat there's one in French, and which says that Guinea is part of WABES. And what are the actions led by Guinea, i.e. what is Guinea doing and what are the results? So I don't know whether at the tip of your fingers, Sylvestre, you can say anything about Guinea.
Guinea-Conakry, I guess, or it's Guinea-Bissau.
I don't know. Jacques, you have to tell us which Guinea it is, the Francophone Guinea or the Portuguese Guinea. So come back to us on that one, and Sylvestre will give you the answer there.
Okay. Yeah, I can see it's now Conakry. He answers.
Okay.
Yes. Of course, Guinea is also involved because for all our activities, we always invite Guinea, a representative from Guinea. I think we are even in touch with the Director General of Environment in Guinea, who even identified, delegate someone to attend regularly the activities of WABES. I can say that Guinea is deeply involved in WABES activities.
Thank you, Sylvestre. A question here. IPES uses a lot of electronic communication, especially social media. Is this effective for reaching West African stakeholders? And what other kinds of communication channels would be effective in your view?
Okay, this is a very nice question. Thank you very much. Yes, as I was saying, one of the big challenges in this region is the language barrier. And IPES communication is mainly in English. So what we do, we receive regularly the notification from IPES. So if we receive them, we translate them into French and we share with our network. That's what we do. It will be through the WABES platform. I was talking about the online platform. Also social media like Facebook, Twitter, and all this kind of media. So that's what we used to do. Okay. We try to translate into French for them.
Yeah, well, absolutely. Just as we saw with the early career researchers, the barriers are when it's not in your own language and everything is in English. We seem to have now started a trend, Sylvestre, where lots of people in the audience want to know about their countries. So there is a question here about what type of support has the focal point in Côte d'Ivoire received?
Yes, this is. So first of all, let me thank the National Focal Point of Côte d'Ivoire, who has taken the initiative to organize at national level a network so that, to contribute particularly to the review process of IPES document. So what he used to do is to organize a meeting at national level, and WABES come to this meeting, explain the process of IPES to the audience, in French or we explain clearly to him and to the participant, so that and motivate them more to participate in IPES process. This is what for now we do. Of course, we also plan to together to apply to call for proposal to implement the national platform. For now, it's not yet we we did not yet success to do it, but I think we are on the good way to succeed. Yeah.
Sylvestre, another question from Sonny Gitu. This is about Nigeria. How do you work with Nigeria, and how are subnational organizations involved?
Subnational organization.
Yes, that's how the question is written. Sonny Gitu, if you've got something more precise about subnational organizations, please put it in the Q&A box. But just generally, Sylvestre, can you talk about your work with Nigeria?
Yes, it's as I said, all West African countries, ECOWAS countries, are members of WABES, and I can confirm that we regularly invite representatives from Nigeria to our activities, our workshop, and so the national focal point of Nigeria used to participate to IPES, to our activities, and also through the capacity building. We have trained now 2 students from Nigeria. One already successfully defended her thesis. She was a lady, and the second one is currently at the master program. So this is a way really to involve all these countries.
Okay, thank you, Sylvestre. Stay with us. There's a question for Cecilia on this theme of capacity building. And Cecilia, the question is, how much of the work of your national platform is on capacity building in Sweden? And do you have any thoughts about how the IPES Secretariat could perhaps support this even more?
I think IPES Secretariat do support a lot if you ask for help, but of course there are always more to do. And as we try to reach out to people as much as possible, it's still not well known. If you ask people around about IPES, they are not sure what it is, but IPCC is more well known in Sweden. So that's why we struggle with that still, and biodiversity is more complex and more difficult to understand than climate change, it seems to, because media today is more focused on climate change than on biodiversity. So yeah, we have a long way to go, and to I think what also was found in ECHA, as we heard earlier this morning, that you need to educate more and more, from children up to all people in a society, to reach a transformative change that is discussed as a goal now. I don't know if no.
Well, Cecilia, that's really interesting what you say. My previous background was in the media. And is it because climate change, we can see it affecting our daily lives, and that people don't make the links between climate change and biodiversity enough? You mentioned in your opening remarks that you wanted to do more work on the links between climate change and biodiversity. Is that something that you think you have to really strengthen and get the messages out there to people?
I think that's really important, to see the coupling and the relation. The biodiversity is affected by climate and vice versa. So we need to discuss both in the same at the same time. That's really important to reach out.
And Sylvestre, just out of interest, also in your region, is there much more understanding of the impact of climate change rather than biodiversity loss?
Yeah, okay, I'm sitting here in an institution, WASCAL, who is dealing with the issue of climate change on, but not only biodiversity, but the overall system of the region. And we also, I think WASCAL is also even member of the IPCC. So we are conducting research on interdisciplinary research on the impact of climate change on different systems. We also have several graduate schools distributed in different universities in the region. dealing with specific topic. I can give us some example. We have a climate change and biodiversity graduate school in Cote d'Ivoire, and climate change and on the impact of climate change on water resources, which is based in Togo, in Lomé, and so on and so on. So yeah, this is we are really tackling the issue of climate change in the region here. So different research activities.
I'd like to bring in Rob Spool, Director of Communications, again about the new report that you're launching this week. It was mentioned at the beginning of this day about the links between climate change and biodiversity. Rob.
Thanks very much, Claire. Yes, just building on the comments that both Cecilia and Silvestre have been making, and more by way almost as a public service announcement to our 122 participants on the call. I'm very pleased to let everybody know that the much awaited workshop, co-sponsored workshop between IPBES and the IPCC's workshop report will be launched this Thursday at 3 p.m. Central European Standard Time. And people who are interested in joining that, it'll be webcast live on YouTube, and it will also be made available on the IPBES website. So keep an eye on our IPBES social media channels. And there'll also be announcements about that on the IPBES website. So if you'd like to be joining that, please do tune into the YouTube broadcast. It's the first time that the IPBES and IPCC expert communities have collaborated formally together, looking at the interlinkages between climate change and biodiversity, and looking specifically at the synergies and the trade-offs between policies in both of those areas. So I think for the entire community, a rather important report launch to be keeping an eye on.
Thank you, Rob, for that public service announcement. Very well done, given that we've got such a large audience who are joining us today. And I would like to thank Silvestre very, very much, and Cecilia for updating us on what you're doing in your countries and regions. So thank you very, very much. I would now like to hand over to my co-moderator, who is going to take us through the next session. Over to you, Wanja.
Thank you, Claire. We're still on regional and national platforms and networks, and we will be looking at the engagement of Indigenous peoples and local communities. As we've heard, Indigenous and local knowledge is recognized by IPBES for its crucial role in conserving and managing biodiversity. So the next session will explore the important work being done by Indigenous peoples and local communities at local, national, and regional levels, and how these connect with the work of IPBES. I'm therefore very pleased to pass the floor to Lucy Mulunkei, who is the co-chair of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity. And Lucy is a long-term supporter of IPBES work on Indigenous peoples and local, Indigenous and local knowledge. Lucy, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wanja, and thank you, everyone. It is my pleasure to welcome you in this session, which will explore how regional, national, and local networks of Indigenous peoples and local communities are interacting with IPBES. As a highlight by the global assessment, at least a quarter of the global land area is traditionally owned, managed, used, and occupied by Indigenous peoples. And this is a figure increased significantly when local communities are also included. So it's quite a lot of work, and we are very glad that we are there. It is also important to recognize Indigenous people and local community as key actors in relation to achieving biodiversity goals, and happy that IPBES recognizes IPLCs, that is Indigenous peoples and local communities, as knowledge holders and stakeholders at the same time. IPBES has organized several meetings and workshops in order to enhance the work of IPLCs. With this then, IPBES developed an approach to recognizing and working with Indigenous local knowledge, and a participatory mechanism that aim to ensure participation, a continuous participation of Indigenous people and local communities within its process. This discussion, I think, will continue as we continue tomorrow, and also considering that this is not just the end, is a way we have been continuing together discussing these issues. And we are, as International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity, we are really grateful that we we continue working together and really learning a lot as we bring quite some expertise also discussing the same issues. However, also of critical importance is the work that Indigenous people and local communities are doing themselves within local and national and also regional areas, you know, in the context. And also at the international level, as we know, this particular, like the whole of last month, this month, there have been some discussions on the post-2020 Global Biodiversity Forum framework, even the ICBES, SABSTAR, and others which have been going on consequently together. And we really appreciate the work that is being done, and we keep sharing each other's time to make sure that we participate in all areas, because that's the only way we can be able to continue enhancing our capacity. One important initiative by Indigenous people also is one that I want to mention about the local communities, has been the creation of the network of Center of Distinctions and Indigenous local knowledge, a network that promotes the integrity and value of Indigenous and local knowledge in science and policy. This has really been very good. And in this session, we will be hearing from two speakers about their work relating to the biodiversity and how the connection to ICBES. And indeed, these particular centers of distinctions are very, very important. And we are really happy and looking forward that Indigenous peoples and local communities are going to be even more active as the year comes to the end, and as we begin the next few years, as we know that we have partners already, the FPP, ICBES, and having a lead discussion person who guides us all throughout, Georgie Carino, guiding us in terms of looking at these particular centers of excellence so that we can be able to be taking our science work and our traditional knowledge, our Indigenous knowledge, together in a way that we can be able to advance the work also that and support the work of ICBES. So today, as I say, we have two speakers. One will be Simon Mitambo and Gaduru Mboro. They are all from Kenya. It's interesting that they are all from Kenya. And I'll start with Simon Mitambo. He's from Mount Kenya region of a place called Tharaka in Kenya. He's an earth jurisprudence practitioner and a student of geotheme science, the philosophy of nature. Simon is a teacher of an ancient wisdom and cosmology of the African indigenous peoples. He's an expert of the earth law at the UN Harmony with Nature Initiative. He's a founder of the Society for Alternative Learning and Transformation and a nature-based school in Kenya. So you can see he has really a lot of experience in terms of looking at this particular knowledge. And he's also working with the African Biodiversity Network, which also gives us quite a lot of important information and has been undertaking quite some big programs in terms of looking at biodiversity in Africa. And he's a regional program coordinator. He coordinates his work across Africa in 12 countries, and Simon possesses a graduate degree in sociology and linguistics from the University of Nairobi. So Simon Mitambo, please go ahead, and you are welcome, and we are looking forward for your presentation. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you, Lucy, for the introduction. I greet everyone this morning or afternoon, depending on wherever everyone is. I want to talk about one of the centers of distinction in indigenous and local knowledge that is here in Africa. The one Lucy has just mentioned about, called African Biodiversity Network, is a network of individuals, organizations, and others, those who are passionate about relationship with the nature. We are guided by values that are actually embedded in our indigenous traditions, like values of diversity and the respect for nature and the people, and also solidarity. And part of this journey that we have worked together is very much about working on some interventions. Some of these are around community ecological governance, because when we talk about nature, we are talking also about the governance, because there are particular ways in which the indigenous people have always governed these territories for many years. Now that we are also saying that there is a demonstration and evidence about diversity of biodiversity. So there are quite a number of ways we work with our communities, and also very much around reviving diversity, because one of the messages of the IPBES is that we are experiencing a great loss of genetic diversity, and part of the work that African Biodiversity does across Africa is also to work with the partners and the communities who passionately revive diversity of their food crops, diversity of their seed, and also the related knowledge, because the knowledge around that particular biodiversity that is revived, and also the practice around it among the indigenous people, is very, very important, because it is around that knowledge and practice that you find a relationship with the biodiversity that is being revived. And something of interest probably also to mention is that we have been piloting and pioneering a number of tools and methodologies that are founded in communities' values and identity. And it is through these tools that we have co-piloted with communities across Africa that our communities are trying to use to reflect about their past, because the past is very important. It helps us to understand the way we find our biodiversity today is still the same way it was, so that we begin from the point of information that there has either been destruction and there's either been any other harm to the biodiversity. So it is very much about trying to help us to understand the past and the present. And this is what creatively helps the communities now to envision the future. So they are trying to build a future that is informed and inspired by the knowledge about rich biodiversity in the past, so that they don't assume that that territory or that landscape has been like that for that long time. And so we have a number of these tools like community dialogues, like maps and calendars, like nature experiential learning, where we have opportunities to interact more with nature, because also when we interact more with nature, we also understand the law of nature. We also understand the language of nature. And it is by building this kind of relationship that we feel the processes of IPBES will have more meaning, because it is at this moment we'll stop seeing nature as also a resource. In fact, we look at nature more differently as life supporting, and the drive of how we survive within our environment is more critical than the economic gains that we derive from nature. And of course, notwithstanding that the economical gains also will come. And maybe something I would also want to talk very little about is through this, also working very closely with the SwediBio and Stockholm Resilience Center, we have done some application of some of these tools. For example, there is one we call multiple evidence-based approach, which is an approach where we bring different knowledge systems to interact and guided by the principles of equity and respect, and also the usefulness. So when the science or when the traditional knowledge come together, they come on equal basis. None of the two or none of the either language comes to validate the other one, because different knowledge systems have their different ways of validating themselves. So this is part of what we have worked on journey. And I want just to mention some of the activities we have been involved in with our partners and the communities across Africa, and especially a recent activity we did with the communities from Ethiopia, from Benin and also here in Kenya, where we brought together these communities. Usually we have been doing face-to-face kind of dialoguing and sharing, but of course faced by the COVID-19 and the restrictions of travel, we have also tried to bring in some hybrid way of doing this. It has been very much around trying to also apply like some virtual walking workshop. We call them walking workshop because when we walk along the landscape with the different people will see different biodiversity from different perspectives. Maybe these are herbal doctors, this could be other practitioners like also scientists, water people, and we bring that knowledge together when we come to speak. And so we did this walking workshop, and it was very successful. And we brought all these communities together to try and dialogue around that walking workshop. And it is through this that there's been also a lot of reflection. And again, when I talked about the whole reflection of trying to relate this, because when the elders are also there, they will say, this used to be like this and that. And so within the view of that, there's been a lot of experiences that we have shared, and we have also been guided by IPBES ways of working with indigenous people. But of course, this has not been without challenges. We have always found that sometimes the dominant mode of thinking about our future, for indigenous people, it is very related. The past, present, and future, they almost come like together, but the dominant is like linear, present, past, and the future also being like separate. But also we have also learned a lot of lessons, and the lessons is that communities faced by multiple crises, they always have solutions. We have also found that when we bring these communities together and they discuss and they borrow from the ancestral wisdom, there has also been many answers to some of the challenges that have faced us. And what is also coming through is that moving forward with this challenge of the loss of biodiversity, because some of the indigenous people are also trying to revive their traditions and their practices. I think this is something that should be recognized and supported, although this is just happening at the community level. So there is a lot to share, but let me stop there, and I can answer more questions that come through that bit of discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Simon. I think those were really great words, and I like the way you brought up some issues that you really observed. And of course, with challenges are there, which we might bring back again. And I'm looking forward for people to bring questions on the chat, on the questions, and also any comments on the chats are also welcome. And let's now go to Kaduru Mburu. Mr. Mburu is trained in environmental planning and management, as well as cultural ecology. And for many years, over 15 years now, he has worked with communities on agroecology and indigenous local knowledge in systems conservation, and many years on governance of local ecosystems across Africa. He is now working as a member of the County Assembly in Kiambu, and we'll see what he's going to bring to us. It's very interesting from the other side, working with the community and now working with the assembly, and let's see how that shifts with the policies. Thank you, Mburu. If you are there, please go ahead, and you're welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Lucy. As you've heard, my name is Gaturu Boro, and I work with an organization called Gather Community Foundation. And one of the things that I would like to say upfront is that this organization is actually a member of African Biodiversity Network, and also working very closely with the Center of Distinction on Indigenous and Local Knowledge that Lucy mentioned earlier on. Gather Community Foundation is currently working with elders and farmers around Aberdare and Mount Kenya forests, which are very rich eco-cultural relationship with the local people. And working around Mount Kenya especially, and also Aberdare forest, these are some of the very rich biodiversity areas in the country, and also very rich indigenous knowledge around biodiversity. Gather Community Foundation was founded actually around the issue, a very important practice in indigenous and local communities, that of reciprocity. Actually, gather in the local language, it's reciprocity. And one of the things that we are doing is looking at the policy environment. So let's go to the next slide. The policy environment, next one. Looking at policy environment in Kenya around the issue of indigenous knowledge, and now we find that we have the Kenya Constitution 2010, which is very progressive on the issue of issues of culture. We also have the National Policy on Traditional Knowledge, Genetic Resources, and Traditional Expressions, National Museums Act 2006, Forest Act, the Witchcraft Act, very interesting, which was done in 1925, but revised over years, with the latest being in 2012. And we also have the Protection of Traditional Knowledge and Cultural Expressions Act, and a host of other policies that are being developed. Next slide. So next slide, please. The strategies that we use actually, go back to the previous slide. The strategies that we use mainly have been mentioned by Simon, because Gado is a member of ABN, and we do a lot of knowledge mobilization, because one of the things that we've realized is that when you come to issues of science, issues of policy, and you're bringing this together with indigenous knowledge, it's important that the indigenous and local knowledge is also very well prepared, so that they can actually negotiate or dialogue from an equal point. So we hold a lot of dialogues with elders. We support strengthening or reviving and strengthening earth, respect for earth spirituality, which is actually embedded in traditional worship. So we do all this. Let's go to the next slide. Next slide, please. And we also support co-management, which sort of looks at how biodiversity or ecosystems can be managed using a plurality of knowledge and also practice in the governance. And co-management with government agencies, especially around sacred forests such as Mount Kenya, and we are very soon working around the Goto Forest. So this is very important, because you're bringing together two different knowledge systems that are agreeing to work together for the common good. Let's go to the next slide. So the other thing that we do is reviving the age-old agroecological practices, like and also based on reciprocity, which is a deeply spiritual aspect of farming, or especially where you bring harvests, which are also seeds for blessings before planting and even before feeding on the harvest. Next slide. One of the most important things that we've been discussing with the elders is about protection of indigenous or rather ecological phenomena, and especially forests. So one of the things that we've been doing is supporting potentiation, what we are calling vaccinating ecological phenomena. And we are using that word vaccinating because it's actually like vaccinating. When you do a ritual in a forest, and this forest it's potentiated, if it's a sacred site or if it's a new site that you want to turn or to potentiate and protect through sacredness, then you're vaccinating that ecological phenomena against destruction. And this is one of the things that we are exploring together with the elders, so that even ecological phenomena such as forests that are indigenous and are not sacred, we see if it is possible for them to be conferred with sacredness as a means or strategy of indigenous protection or conservation. Next slide. Challenges along the way, quite a number. We've seen that there is a lot of misinterpretation and misunderstanding of indigenous and local knowledge, and also the weak implementation of existing policies. And I had this being mentioned as even in South Africa, even in Europe, that this is happening. And actually, as I mentioned, those policies that we have in the country, some of them are just there, but they have not been implemented, or they are being implemented in a way that is not really strengthening the use and the respect of indigenous knowledge. Then there is a very weak link with the international undertakings such as IPBES, and also a very slow pace of downloading this to the national and the subnational levels. We have a focal point in Kenya, and it's working, but the interactions have not been that deep. And this is one thing that we would like to see happen in the coming years. And also another thing that has been a challenge along the way has been commodification and individualization of indigenous and local knowledge, which actually weakens the communal and spiritual character, because basically EOC, or indigenous and local knowledge, is communal. But we've seen in the recent past that it is being commodified, it is being individualized, and this is actually one way of taking it away from the people and also weakening or diluting that knowledge and also the practice around the local phenomena, because indigenous knowledge is usually constructed around local phenomena. And lastly, there is the very worrying trend where we have seen everything indigenous being memorialized, which is, it's just there to be seen, to be admired, but it is not being utilized. But what we are saying today as the Gather Community Foundation is that we need to move away from memorialization of indigenous knowledge, but make it dynamic, or continue using its dynamic character so that it can be useful today in the 21st century. We've seen this happen a lot, and what we are saying is indigenous and local knowledge needs to be made as dynamic and as useful as the rest of the knowledge bases. So we need to move away from thinking as if it's the past, but we are talking about how it can be used today and how it can also be used to help us to develop or to develop the scenarios in the future that we would want. So next slide, please. So finally, in moving forward, I think I've mentioned, I've dealt with this a little bit, and in moving forward, we would, as Gather Community Foundation, we will be dealing with the issue of memorialization, so that we make it we make EOC as dynamic as possible in the 21st century and beyond. Also looking at vaccination of new sacred phenomena, or how we can indigenous knowledge can actually be used. So if we have a sacred tree somewhere within a forest, is it possible to have that forest conferred with sacredness by virtue of having a sacred tree within it? And also we'll be looking at how we can bring different knowledges together so that they can engage along the future's thinking, so that the scenarios that we want are actually contributed to by different knowledge systems. Thank you, Lucy.
Thank you very much, Mburu. I think that was really fascinating to see and to listen to that, and the way you looked at policy and also brought up the aspects of the communities. It was also interesting to hear about the exchange visit from Simon when he was presenting, because communities, when they see something, they hardly forget. And since they are science themselves, it's always very important to make sure that at least we know how that knowledge they have works and how it can also be shared. Just before we go, I know we are running out of our time, but there is a question here from Shivani Rai to Simon. Can you please elaborate on the tools and methodologies that helps communities to reflect their past indigenous knowledge? Do you think the same methods can be used in other countries as well? I think that's, and then again, there is one from Carlo, because I want you to take them quickly together. Simon Mitambo, is the knowledge emerging from the community's meanings being compiled and integrated into potentially or focused ICBES reports on this topic? Where are there, what are the barriers to transfer this knowledge to the science policy interface? So those are very concrete questions to you, Simon. I think there is one in French, il faut quelqu'un traduire. No. So let's have Simon quickly try to take those two questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lucy. Thank you very much, Shivani. The first question on elaboration of the tools and methodologies and whether this can be applied to other communities. I think yes, I can confirm that these methodologies are applied according to different contexts, and they are actually driven by communities' cultural knowledge, and they can unfold in many different ways depending on the priorities and the context for the community at a given time. So they are not a cut and paste, but the principles are the same. Principles are the same, but they can apply. But of course, you have to be aware of the context, and like I'm saying, they can unfold in different ways depending on the priorities of that particular community and the context. Then the other question on the knowledge emerging from the communities.
If I could just intervene, Simon, I do apologize. Time is not our friend.
Okay.
And we do need to wrap up just so that people can go into the other meeting for the facilitated session. So apologies for stopping you mid-breath.
I will see if I can answer by typing there.
Yes, that would be helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you ever so much, and do that. And I would just quickly like to hand over to Wanja, who's going to conclude this session.
Thank you, Lucy, and thank you, Claire. Today's meeting for Europe and Africa is now drawing to a close, and I would like to thank all the panelists and participants for such an interactive engagement. And there are so many takeaway messages, but just highlighting some of them, I'd like to highlight, particularly Leonie, who, an IPBES young fellow, discussed her experience with values assessment and how this is supporting her career path. We heard also from other networks like Håkon when he talked about the social sciences and humanities network on filling gaps in this discipline in the work of IPBES. We also heard about WebS, which ignited a lot of discussion among participants on support for ECOWAS countries and capacity building, including a master's program. And we just concluded by hearing about the importance of indigenous peoples and local communities, and that they are recognized by IPBES for their contribution to biodiversity conservation. We've learned about tools such as the walking workshops from Simon and the sharing of different perspectives on how to work with indigenous and local knowledge. And so because of time, as Claire has mentioned, I would like now, without much ado, to invite Miguel Fernandez from OneNet facilitation team, who will explain about the next session aimed at refining the ONET and the IFPES statements. Miguel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. On behalf of the ONET facilitation team, I would like to communicate the work and activities that will lead us to define the IPBES stakeholder opening statement successfully. The participatory process that we have proposed from ONET has multiple stages. The first stage was initiated in April when we sent an email that included an online form to all ONET members. This online form had the objective of inviting the IPBES stakeholder community to suggest ideas that could be part of the opening statement at IPBES 8. The initial email was followed by reminders as well as announcements made through social media platforms that reinforced our initial invitation. Second stage in the process was set for May 31st during the Caucus Day meeting, where we invited additional ideas from ONET community. Through a survey request, it is important but very difficult to capture the discussion component. Therefore, during the Caucus Day, we provide our guests the opportunity to discuss the present and present their ideas. The facilitation team had worked to synthesize and aggregate these ideas. To further this process, today we will open a global consultation among Stakeholder Day participants, focusing on Africa, Central Asia, and Europe region. In the chat window, a link has been provided to 2 different meetings. One will be for the session dedicated to the design and of the opening statement of the open-ended network of IPBES stakeholders, that is ONET. And the second link will be for the session dedicated to work on the opening statement of the International Indigenous Forum on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES. Please carefully select which meeting would you like to participate. I'm looking forward to see you there. Thank you so much. Back to you, Wanja.
Thank you, Miguel. And so, as mentioned before, the meetings are being recorded. And there's a slide that's coming up now that will show you the links that you can find the Stakeholder Day YouTube links on the IPBES website. So in addition, in the chat box, you'll also be able to join the links, as Miguel has mentioned. You may be in a waiting room until this current meeting closes. But with that, I would just like to thank everyone for the great participation. And it's amazing for us today to be so many people meeting on the Africa and Europe meeting during the World Oceans Day celebrations. Thank you and goodbye.